Civil War. The scariest thing about this film is that the lights are still on. This is a nightmare scenario for preppers. It's what I call a gray zone apocalypse. In a grid down scenario where the lights go off, it's easy to tell the good guys from the bad guys. It's an easier world to navigate when you know there are no rules, when everywhere you go is a red zone. But what if there's red zones and green zones? That's a terrifying scenario for a lot of preppers, but that is truly what a war zone would be. Red zones are going to be characterized by anarchy and lawlessness, roving gangs, violence. Green zones, in this context, are going to be authoritarian fiefdoms with a lot of rules. That's the problem with a dystopian world where the lights are still on, is that you're going to have a lot of different people making a lot of different sets of rules, and you're not going to know who is good and who is bad. This is a much more challenging scenario for preppers to navigate. With the complete collapse of the power grid, morality becomes a lot clearer. The situations become a lot more straightforward. What Alex Garland, the director of Civil War, is setting up here accentuates the stark contrast between the survivors' bad behavior and the seemingly intact world that surrounds them. Throughout today's video, I'm going to be sharing my perspective of the movie Civil War. There's a common theme in this movie that I haven't heard one movie reviewer talk about, and I'm going to be sharing that with you today. So the movie Civil War takes place in a near-term dystopian future in which America has been broken up into several different warring alliances, 4 to be exact. Now, 3 of these alliances consist of the California and Texas Alliance, the Northern States Alliance, the Florida Alliance, and all of these 3 are united against the government in Washington, which has become tyrannical. The 4 main characters are reporters across 3 different generations. There's Sammy, who's the old wise man who foreshadows all the bad stuff before it happens, probably one of the most underrated characters in the film. There's Lee, played by Kirsten Dunst, who is our main protagonist, who is struggling with trying to remain impartial and objective in this chaotic world where she's forced to not take a side. There's Jesse, who is Lee's protege, and then there's Joel, played by Wagner Moura, who's kind of just along for the ride. Now, surprisingly, in this movie, there are very few deaths on screen. It almost feels like there's hundreds, because the deaths that you see are so impactful, and it's because the lights are still on. It's the contrast of the war being fought in a vaguely familiar, semi-civilized world that is so hauntingly humanizing. In my personal opinion, I don't think this movie is about what most of the movie reviewers say it's about. I think this film is actually about our amusement and obsession with the collapse of our society. This movie delves into America's fixation on documenting and contemplating collapse. The question is, why is it that we are so mesmerized with our own demise? Let me explain. I think that the current generations, be they X, Y, and Z, we feel as though there isn't much purpose. There's no cause to champion. There's no battle worth fighting for. So our fascination now lies in surviving the chaos of our collapsing world. And I think we all anticipate that there's a chance to build anew. You'll notice that in recent times, it seems that the presence of journalists at protests, they almost exceed the amount of protesters themselves. I mean, there are just these armies of photographers and videographers and reporters documenting what's unfolding. And I can only wonder, is this something that inspired the director to make this film and present it in the way that they did? This film seems to be a commentary on our society's obsession with storytelling through social media, always at the expense, though, of being fully engaged in the present moment. There's an iconic scene in the movie where the protagonists, Lee and Jesse, are sitting in the bleachers, and they're looking down at this tent city in this stadium where everybody is getting respite and receiving aid from AIDS workers because it's the apocalypse and everybody's poor, okay? Now, this scene basically explains to people exactly what Alex Garland is trying to illustrate here. And what he's trying to show is that we are entertained by our own destruction. So no longer are our protagonists looking down from the bleachers watching bread and circuses and sporting events. They're now watching the very collapse of their society unfold in real time, in HD. Similarly, there's another scene where Sammy, one of the older, more wiser characters in the film, is sitting with Lee on a bench at nighttime, and they're watching what at first appears to be fireworks. And of course, they're trying to draw this parallel because in peripheral scenes, they were also talking about July the 4th. Interestingly, the fireworks are not fireworks at all. They are gunshots and explosions going off. This is another example of where the director is trying to show how we are enamored with our own destruction, and that itself has become the entertainment. Here's another angle to explore this movie from. I actually think that the director is painting a self-portrait with this movie. Because think about it. They are in essence presenting a story about the process of making the movie itself. Everybody thought before this movie came out that it was going to be politically controversial. The director was trying to remain as impartial as possible, while people, of course, tear themselves apart about what the actual film's meaning is and where the political allegiances lie. The whole point of this movie is to show how Lee, the main character, is trying to remain impartial, stoic, and indifferent in the face of all of this chaos and trying to report it in an objective manner. And that is what the director himself is struggling with in trying to present this story to people. For myself personally, the least interesting aspects of this film are the glaring depiction of political instability, the importance of journalistic integrity, the reality of war, finding our humanity, and the plausible depiction of an American Civil War. All of these themes are presented very well, but they're far from the most important message within this movie. And that is that we are preoccupied with being entertained with our own self-destruction. And unlike most American films, in this movie there is no happy ending. For me, this symbolizes the death of the American dream. What has defined American society up until this point is the idea that if you work hard enough, you'll be able to get ahead. However, the movie concludes in a way which is cold, abrupt, and tragic, symbolizing that indeed the American dream is dead. One of the most terrifying aspects of the film is that it's not didactic. It is not trying to tell you who's on the right side and who's on the wrong side of history. This would be far easier to watch if you knew who the good guys and the bad guys were. Instead, it's morally ambiguous. The director intentionally puts Texas and California on the same side, so to minimize accusations of political bias influencing the film. Another unsettling aspect of this movie is just how plausible it all seemed. It seemed as though it could seamlessly flow from our current set of circumstances that we're experiencing. Maybe not this year or next, but maybe a few years down the road, if things continue in the direction that they're heading, this indeed could happen. Now, while the movie attempts to not make any political statements, there is a little bit of exposition about what caused the Civil War in the first place. In the movie, the president apparently is giving himself a third term. There was airstrikes that were conducted against civilians. He scrapped the FBI, but you're not really told why he did any of these things. And you could imagine that there would be legitimate reasons why he would need to do certain things. Was there a world war? Was there an insurrection? There could be several different legitimate scenarios where the president had to enact that level of martial law and do these things. Now, some criticisms of the film is that it's not saying anything beyond war is bad. The problem is when you're trying to communicate with a Western audience, you can show us pictures of war happening over there. You can show us a fully fledged war zone in Europe, in the Middle East. But communicating the visceral nature of war being a bad thing to an American viewer is more difficult because what you're trying to do is make a situation that is relatable. Hence why the lights are on in this movie. One of my favorite characters in the movie is Sammy because he is one of the least naive in the group. In fact, he is the one who is always foreshadowing all the bad things that are going to happen next. And this is understandable because, of course, he's from the boomer generation where they might have experienced more hardship, and unlike the younger reporters, isn't naive to the horrors of the world. In spite of the fact that Lee, the main protagonist, has seen all of these crazy things unfold, she nonetheless is still very naive about this post-collapse world. Now, I could probably break the movie down scene by scene and identify all the symbolic parts of the film, but I think we're going to save that for a future video. We're going to see if we can derive any prepper lessons from this film. But that is my interpretation of the overarching theme of this film. Let me know what you thought about it in the comment section below. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Canadian Prepper out.
The best way to support this channel is to support yourself by gearing up at CanadianPreparedness.com, where you'll find high-quality survival gear at the best prices, no junk, and no gimmicks. Use discount code PREPPINGGEAR for 10% off. Don't forget, the strong survive, but the prepared thrive. Stay safe.